Continue with Book 3, Chapter 32, Verse 7. Combatants stood face to face with their arms lifted, steadily staring at each other as if they were pictures in a painting. Armies arranged in long regiments, standing in lines opposite each other, repeatedly shouted and answered each other. The battle array of both armies and the drums on each side were stopped by their leaders, warning against striking the first blow. The space that separated the hostile forces was the breadth of two bows, like a bridge from one another. It looked like a gap caused by winds in the middle of the ocean at the universal deluge. Leaders were drowned in thoughts of fear of bloodshed and massacre. Cowardly soldiers groaned in their hearts with the hoarse noise of croaking frogs. There were many brave ones, eager to yield their precious lives in a thrice. Archers stood with bowstrings drawn to the ear, ready to let their pointed arrows loose at the foot. Others stood dreadfully fixed to strike their arms upon the enemy. Many with frowning looks stared sternly at their adversaries. Armor was clashing. The faces of killers were burning with rage, and the faces of cowards turned towards sheltered retreats, ready for flight. All stood in doubt of their lives until the end of the war, and the bodies of old men, like big elephants, were covered with goosebumps. The silence, in anticipation of the first blow, resembled the calm of the stormy main or the deep sleep of a city at the dead of night. Musical instruments, drum and conch shell, were all silent, and a thick cloud of dust covered the face of the earth and sky. The retreaters were flying from their stronger assailants, who kept running after them like sharks after shoals of fish in the sea. The glittering fringes of flags put the ethereal stars to blush, and the lifted goads in the hands of the elephant drivers made a forest of tapering trees in the sky. Arrows flew in the air like flocks of the winged tribe, and the loud beating of drums and blowing of pipes resounded in the air. Around Phalanx attacked a host of wicked demons, and a squadron in Garuda formation of right and left wings attacked a body of elephants. Somewhere a great howling arose from the vanguard of a body of troops thrown into disorder by a cohort in the form of eagle. In another place, many were seen shouting and attacking each other. Warriors of many legions raised a tremendous noise, and the hands of combatants raised a host of large clubs. The glare of dark steel shaded sunbeams like a cloud. Darts hissing in the air resembled the rustling of breeze amidst the dry leaves of trees. Now began the main battle. Like the dashing of clouds upon cloud at the end of a Kalpa age, war raged like sea whipped by a hurricane. Big elephants fell in the field like cold black rocks, hurled down by gusts of wind. It seemed like infernal spirits had been let loose from their caves of hell to rage in the battlefield with their horrid and dismal figures. The dark cloud of swords hid daylight, and warriors raised their black spears, seemingly bent upon converting the earth into an ocean of bloodshed. Chapter 33, The Battle. The armies engage. Ram said, "Sage described this warfare to me as I love stories of this kind." And Vashishta said, "The ladies, in order to have a better view of the battle below, ascended in their imaginary aerial cars to a more retired spot in the higher regions of the sky. At this time, the two armies clashed and mingled, fighting each other with shouts, like waves dashing against one another in a raging sea. Vidaratha, the lord of the realm, formerly Padma, the husband of Leela, impatient seeing a bold warrior from the other army attack one of his soldiers, used his huge mallet to strike him on the breast. Then the battle raged with the impetuosity of rolling waves in a stormy ocean. Arms on both sides flamed with living fire and flashes of fiery lightning. Now the edges of waving swords glittered in the sky. Cracking and clashing noises filled the air with a hideous crackling. Then flew winged arrows, overshadowing sunbeams and emitting a booming noise that hushed the rattling clamor of summer clouds. Armor clashed against armor with a clanking noise. Shooting sparks of glistening fire. Arms lacking and slashing against arms filled the air with their fragments flying like birds in the air. The shaking arms and legs of the two armies appeared like a forest moving on the land. The twang of their bows and the rumbling of discs, crackling like the rattling drive of wheels in heaven, drove away the birds of the air. The hissing of their loosened strings resembled the bee-like buzzing heard in samadhi. Iron shafts pierced the heads of the soldiers like sleets of hailstones, and the crashing of armor broke arms of the mail-clad warriors. Weapons struck brazen armor with a howling noise and clanking sound. Strokes flying like drifts of rainwater dented the face of the air on all sides. Steel striking steel made hands ring with a jingling sound, and the continued rapping on arms and clapping of hands raised chit-chat and pat-pat sound. The whizzing noise as swords were unsheathed was like the hissing of sparks from fire. The sounds of arrows and darts flying in all directions were like the rustling of falling leaves in autumn. The field was filled with blood sprouting from throats separated from bodies, mangled limbs and heads, and broken swords. The flame of fire flaring from armor emblazoned the hairs of the warriors. The sound of weapons as swordsmen fought and fell raised a giddy and loud jingling. Tall elephants, pierced by spears, poured out torrents of red-hot blood, while their kin gored bodies with shrill cries. Others, crushed by the ponderous maces of their antagonists, creaked grievously under the blows, while heads of slain soldiers swam in rivers of blood over the plain. Here, hungry vultures were pouncing from above, and there the sky was covered by a cloud of dust. Weaponless soldiers, all with their hands, pulling each other down by the hair. The battle as seen by onlookers, chapter 34. Vashishta speaking. The generals and ministers of the warring sides and the aerial spectators of the battle were talking among themselves this way. See, here the ground has become a lake of blood, with heads of slaughtered hosts floating like lotuses upon it. And there, The air has become like the starry heaven, glittering with broken weapons, flying like birds in the sky. Behold, the air is red, with the particles of bright red blood, borne above by the wind. It is midday, but the sky presents evening clouds with the glow of the setting sun. What are these, says one, that are flying like straws in the sky? They are, says the other, not straws, but the flight of arrows that have filled the air. Another cries that as long as the dust of the earth is wet with the blood of the brave, heroes are entitled to glory and have their home in heaven for a myriad of years. A scripture says, to fear not these dark swords, whose blades are worn by the brave like petals of blue lotuses about their breasts. And the brave are favorites in the eyes of the goddess of fortune. The heavenly Apsara nymphs that saw the fighting and felt a desire to embrace the brave. The god of the flowery bow, Kama, the gods of love, was busy loosening their waistbands. They beckoned their welcome by waving their reddened palms, by shaking red leaves on trees, by the round glances of their eyes in the blooming blossoms of plants, and by the perfume of their breath in the honey fragrance of flowers. The guardian spirits of the pleasure gardens of paradise sang sweet notes with the woodland choir and danced in the wagging tails of peacock as the brave warrior broke the enemy line with his hardy axe. His beloved was breaking his hard heart and spirit with the soft glances of her eyes. It is by my lance, says the lancer, that I have severed the head of my enemy with rings in his ears, like the head of the ascending node of rockwood, approaching the disk of the sun. Look, there is a champion hurling rocks of stones attached to the end of a chain reaching his feet. There is another whirling his wonderful log of wood held in his uplifted arm. There comes that warrior in the form of Yama, the god of the underworld, appearing from the region of the dead spirits and spreading a horrid devastation all around. Come, let us go back the way we came. Look at these ravenous birds, greedily plunging their long necks into the flesh of bodies just separated from their heads, and glutting themselves with the gushing blood. See there the headless trunk of the slain, moving to and fro in the field of battle. The eloquent among the spectators were talking to one another about the frailty of human life and the uncertainty of the time of their meeting in the next world. Oh, the stern cannibal of death, says one, that devours entire bodies of armies in one swoop, now weltering in blood, and levels the leveling host to the ground. The showers of arrows falling on the elephants resemble the showers of raindrops on the mountain tops. The darts sticking to their front bones are like the bolts of lightning piercing the cliff tops. While a headless body was groveling on the ground for lack of its head was flying on high like a bird of air, proclaiming its immortality in heaven. The army, harassed by stones slung at their heads, cried to entrap the enemy in the snares set at their feet. Wives that had become Apsaras, heavenly nymphs, after death, were now eager to claim their husbands, restored to their youth by virtue of falling in the field of battle. The glaring light of the line of lances that had reached the skies seemed like a flight of stairs or golden vistas for the ascent of the brave to the gates of heaven. The wife of the slain soldier, now a heavenly goddess, taking possession of her husband's fair gold-like breast, was looking about in search of another. Generals, arms waving, wailed loudly over their fallen enemies in the field. They appeared like cliffs of rocks resounding to the clamorous surge of the sea below. They shouted at the warriors to fight their best. They cried out to remove the wounded to the rear and not trample the bodies of their own soldiers lying low on the ground. Look, there Apsaras were eagerly tying their loosened hair and advancing with sobbing bosoms to receive the departed warriors, joining their company in their celestial form. Receive our guests from afar, says one, on the banks of the rivers of paradise, decorated with golden lotus blossom, and entertain them with fresh water and cooling breeze. Look, there are gorges of weapons broken into pieces like bones by their impact. huddled in the air with a jingling sound and shining like stars in the sky. See the stream of deceased souls flowing in arrow-like currents and rolling in whirlpools of flying discs, rapidly gliding with the pebbles and stones flung in the air from the slings. The sky has become like a lake of lotuses, with lotus-form heads of warriors flung aloft in the air, while flying weapons are floating like their stalks, with the broken swords all around them like their thorns. Flying fragments of flags form the skins of the plants, and the darts sticking to them appear like big black bees, fluttering about the flowers, moving with the breeze. Arrows sticking to the dead bodies of elephants are like ants on mountain tops, and like timid girls clinging to men's bosoms. Winds unfurling the curling locks of supernatural Vidyadhara females indicate their approaching nuptials. Like in an augury, the unfolding plumage of fowls predict success. Lifted umbrellas shine like so many moons on high, and the moon itself, shining above in the form of fair fame, spreads her light like a white canopy over the earth. The brave warrior, soon after his death, assumes a celestial form framed by his own merit. Just like a man in his sleep attains the state he imagined to himself in his waking. Flying spears, lances, clubs, and discs are hurtling in the air like shoals of restless fish and sharks, moving about constantly in the troubled waters of the sea. Milk white rags of umbrellas, tattered and shattered by arrow shafts, fly like cranes in the crowded air, appearing like the disk of the moon, broken into 1,000 pieces. Fans flying in the air with a coarse gurgling seem like waves of the sea lifted in the air, undulating with a babbling noise in the ocean of the sky. Those scraps of fans and umbrellas, ripped by slashing weapons, appear like the laurels of glory flung aloft and flying in the regions of air. Look, O friends, how these flying arrows and showering spears are approaching us with the hits of their spoil, like bodies of locusts bearing away their green booty in the air. Listen to the clanking sound of steel, striking by the uplifted arm of an armored soldier, resounding like the loud alarm of the King of Death. Hear the tremendous blows of weapons, like the fury of an all-destroying tornado, throwing down mountain-like elephants, their great ivory tusks lying on the ground like waterfalls. Look, there the chariot drivers are stopped in their course, struggling to make their way through puddles of blood, in which the wheels and horses are stuck together like in a bog of quagmire. The jingling of arms and armor, and the jangling of swords and steel resound like a lute. Playing for the dancing of the dire and dreaded Dame of Death. See, the skirts of the sky are reddened by the red particles borne by the winds from streams of blood flowing out of the wounds in the bodies of men, horses, and elephants lying dead in the field. Look at the array of arrows in the air, in the shape of a wreath of blossom, falling like lightning from dark black clouds of weapons hanging on high. See the surface of the earth filled with blood-red weapons, appearing like faggots of fire strewn over the ground in a universal conflagration. A multitude of weapons mingle together, clashing and breaking one another into pieces, falling down in showers like the innumerable rays of the sun. The fighting of one man among the motionless many is like the play of a magician acting his parts for a bewitched audience. See, their indifferent spectators are viewing the battle as a dream by their prajna or inner vision of the mind. The field of battle, where all other sounds are hushed under the clashing of arms, resembles the stage of the martial god Bhairava, chanting his pitiless war song in jarring cacophony. The battlefield is turned into a sea of blood, filled with the sands of pounded weapons and rolling with the waves of broken discuses. The sky is filled with marital music, loudly sounding on all sides. Echoes off the hills seem to challenge one another in their aerial flight and fighting. Alas for shame, says one, that these arrows, flung with such force from bowstring, flying with such loud hissing, glittering like red-hot lightning, are foiled in their aim of piercing impenetrable armor and glancing off, hitting stoning hill. Hear me, friend, you are tired of the sight. It is time for us to leave this place before our bodies are pierced by these sharp arrows flashing like fire, and before the day runs its course into the evening. Chapter 35, the battle, description of the battlefield. Vashishta said, the waves of Calvary mounting to the sky made the battlefield appear like a raging sea. Moving umbrellas floated as its foam and froth, and feathered silvery arrows glided like finny pearly fish, while cavalry charges and flights heaved and dashed like surges of the sea. Rushing of weapons resembled the running of its currents, and circles of soldiers were its whirlpools. The elephants were like its islets, and their motions resembled the rocks moving in it. Whirling discs were its eddies, and long hair flying on heads, its floating weeds. Sparkling sands were its shining waters, and the flash of swords its glassy spray. Gigantic warriors were its whales, and the alligators, and the resounding caves like its gurgling whirlpools. Flying arrows were its swimming fishes, and floating flags resembled its uprising waves and boars. Shining weapons formed the waters of this ocean, and their whirlpools also, like the long lines of forces, appeared like the huge and horrible bodies of its whales. Soldiers clad in black iron armor were like the dark blue whales of the deep, and the headless bodies, groveling in dust, were like the whirling currents of the sea, with scattered weapons like seaweeds. Showers of arrows hid the skies with a mist, and the confused rattling of the battlefield was like the roaring of clouds. Flying and falling heads of slain soldiers resembled large drops of rain, and their bodies were like pieces of wood whirling in the eddies of the disc. The bold archer, bending his strong bow in the form of a curve and leaping above the ground, resembled the sprouting sea rising from under the ground with heaving waves. The unnumbered umbrellas and the flags that were moving up and down the field were like the foaming and frothing of the sea, rolling in waves of blood and carrying away the beams and timbers of broken chariots in its current. The army's march resembled the flow of seawater, and the blood sprouting from the wounds of elephants were like its bubbles, while the moving horses and elephants represented the sea animals in their motion. The battlefield had become like a wonderful field of the air, in which the furious war, like a tremendous earthquake, shook hills like moving clouds in the sky. Here the waves were undulating like flights of birds in the air, and groups of elephants falling aground like rocks. And the cowardly ranks murmured like herds of frightened deer. The field has become a forest of arrows. Wounded soldiers are standing fixed on the ground like trees, arrows flying like locusts, and horses moving like antelopes. Here a loud drum sounded like the humming of bees in the hollows of trees. The army appears like a mist with a bold warrior sprawling like a lion in it. Dust was rising in clouds and forces falling like rocks. Huge, broken chariots looked like hills, and flaming swords shined on all sides. The rise and fall of soldiers' feet flitted like falling flowers on the ground, and flags and umbrellas rose above it like clouds. All was covered with streams of blood, and high-sounding elephants fell like thundering showers of rain.